In the early 70s, two singer-songwriters named Tim Finn and Phil Judd met in Auckland, New Zealand, and would form a band named Split Enz, releasing two albums of kooky progressive pop co-written by Finn and Judd, plus a few songs credited to Judd alone. However, a combination of disillusionment and increasingly erratic behaviour led to Judd's departure from the band in 1977, with Finn's brother Neil stepping in as his replacement. Naturally, that was the point where Split Enz started having numerous Aussie top 10 hits, including number 1 hit I Got You, also a top 20 hit in the UK. Ouch. The following year, after returning to his hometown, Judd became involved with punk band Suburban Reptiles, producing and playing on their final single Saturday Night Stay at Home, written by the band's drummer Buster Stiggs. After a difficult final show, which saw the band split into two lineups, each playing a set under the Reptiles name, Judd and Stiggs reached out to former Reptiles bassist Bones Hillman and together formed The Swingers. They were named after a pair of earrings, not the thing where you put keys in a bowl and then hook up with... yeah, you know. The trio established themselves in the NZ underground and had a national top 20 hit with their single One Good Reason. In 1980, with hopes of broadening their success, the band relocated to Australia, where they recorded a song called Counting the Beat in August. But the song's final mix wouldn't be completed for 3 months, and their Aussie label held off the single's release until after Christmas. By the time it was out in early 1981, Stiggs had fallen out with the band, and Ian Killjoy Gilroy had flown over from NZ to replace him. With its simple, booming drum beat, giddy earworm melodies, and a wordless chorus that everyone can sing along to, Counting the Beat was a smash hit, spending 3 weeks at number 1 in Australia and rounding out the year as the biggest song in the country for 1981. Incidentally, the biggest song in Australia the year before was I Got You by Split Enz. However, it wasn't until 3 months after they topped the Aussie chart that the Swingers started releasing more singles from their debut album, and neither that album nor the remaining 2 singles from it charted in the Aussie top 40. Just over a year after topping the chart, the Swingers disbanded, leaving them as a near-perfect embodiment of the one-hit wonder trope. Counting the Beat was a kind of fun song to me when I was little, but for many years after that I pretty much didn't think about the song at all. But earlier this year, it not only came back to me again, but it was basically the only song in my head for a month straight, and not really in a bad way. This is a jam, I tell you. It also helps that it hasn't been used over and over again as an ad jingle here in Oz like it has in NZ, so I understand if many New Zealanders don't feel the same way about it. The follow-up single to Counting the Beat was called It Ain't What You Dance, It's the Way You Dance It. How a song with a title like that never caught on, I have no idea. But also, this is a skittish, oddball, funk kind of thing, with Judd practically rapping the verses and Hillman's bass just doing its own wacky thing underneath it all. Not sure what they saw in this as a single, because I feel like it would have been pretty much impossible for a song like this to become a hit. The final single from the album was One Track Mind, certainly a more overtly melodic take on new wave, but it doesn't really have the immediacy of Counting the Beat. The chorus is a killer, but the verses don't have quite as much power. Of course, the final nail may have already been in the coffin at that point, so it probably wouldn't have mattered what they released at that time anyway. Those single choices show that the band was more than capable of writing fantastic hooks, but were perhaps a little too weird to have any prolonged success. And not just weird, but rather silly. They got quite silly at times. That side of the band was exemplified in the name of their sole full-length album, Practical Jokers. Same for its artwork, which is probably one of the most piss-poor album covers I've ever seen. Was it made to intentionally be that way? Probably, but that doesn't make me hate it any less. Luckily, they reissued the album with a less ugly cover and renamed it as Counting the Beat, and one of those reissues keeps the original track list of Practical Jokers and adds 2 bonus tracks, so that's the version that I would recommend to everyone. The opening track, Practical Joker, singular, unsurprisingly comes from the band Silly Side. First time I heard that song, I was like, yeah, this is shit. Then the next time I heard it, I was like, you know what, this is actually a bit catchy. Some of these songs may not leave the best first impression, with Judd's somewhat shrill voice and quirky inflections perhaps the main obstacle, especially on the song Distortion, where he strains to sing in a range that is maybe too high even for him to sing comfortably. Thankfully, those vocals aren't overly indicative of the rest of the album. And if Judd's voice isn't really your thing, the song More has a surprise lead vocal from Hillman, who sings in a far more straightforward manner. That song also has some neat little brass flourishes, which are an outlier on Practical Jokers because it's a very much guitar-driven album. Aside from some extra strings and brass on 2 or 3 tracks, the instrumentation is just guitars and percussion. Even synthesizers, which are a part of pretty much every other new wave band in some way, are completely absent here. But there's certainly more to this album than being a rare synthless take on new wave. Most of these songs are more esoteric than one may expect after hearing Counting the Beat. Then again, even that song is a bit more unusual than it appears on the surface, when most of the guitar part is just chugga muted notes. While strong melodies have been a backbone of Judd's songwriting throughout his whole career, he's always made sure that he does everything his way without chasing trends. The music of the Swingers has clear song structures, but the evolution of these songs can be hard to predict, with unique choruses, pre-choruses, bridges, whatever you might call those sections, that feel rather deviated from the rest of the song. Tracks like 5 O'Clock Shadow and Hit the Beach sound like they could be 3 or 4 different songs that were combined into one. The album shifts between quite a few styles as well, from the janglier one-track Mind to more typical early 80s power pop on Lovesick and Funny Feeling, and Judd's guitar playing sounds as inspired by punk as it is by 50s and 60s rock and roll and surf rock, with a bit of a multi-layered approach full of neat little licks. This guy is a pretty good guitarist for someone that apparently had no formal musical training before he picked up the instrument. And of course, being a more poppy rock album, the melodies reign supreme. Compelling choruses, tight harmonies. I'm terrible at describing what makes a good catchy melody. You'll just have to hear it for yourself. Trust me, some of these hooks are pretty bloody great. The 2 bonus tracks are certainly worth something as well. There's The Flak, a more experimental offering full of jagged guitars, indecipherable vocals, and random overlaid percussion, and the other track is a re-recording of their debut single One Good Reason. The original version is great, especially if you prefer something with a more raw punk feel, but for me, the more polished version is the undoubted winner. It really brings out that larger-than-life chorus. I feel like this song is another tier above Counting the Beat, which is already quite a belter itself, but One Good Reason is an ultra-belter. And it does feel like something that would have done well on the radio back then. Following up their hit with It Ain't What You Dance is even more baffling when they had stuff like this in their locker. But you know the old saying, hindsight is 20/20. So it's a bit shit that the Swingers are only known culturally for that lone #1 hit. And while the album comes across as more of a basic collation of songs than something with a set order, the key thing is that these songs do exist, and they range from brilliant to, at the very least, fun. After their light shone brightest in 1981, they got a little further attention the following year performing in cult Aussie film Starstruck. But also around that time, according to Bones Hillman, Judd just got completely sick of singing. That led to Andrew McLennan being brought into the group as the new lead vocalist and keyboardist. This lineup released one single, Punch and Judy, which reeks of jealousy towards the success of post-Judd Split Enz. McLennan's voice even sounds like it could pass as one of the Finn brothers, though that could just be me. Interestingly, the only live footage I can find of the Swingers online is a performance with McLennan, featuring mostly unreleased songs, and while some of it doesn't sound too bad, the real magic was well and truly gone by that point. Tim Finn would maintain his status as one of New Zealand's most revered musicians, and his brother Neil even more so, as a bona fide international success with his subsequent band Crowded House. Not to mention replacing Lindsey Buckingham in bloody Fleetwood Mac. And Hillman would join famed Aussie band Midnight Oil in 1987, just in time to reap the benefits of their biggest international hit, Beds Are Burning, and he's remained an integral part of the group ever since. While Judd would collaborate with his old Split Enz bandmates over the years that followed, including in a band called Schnell Fenster, which released 2 studio albums, stuck on that Swingers, he wasn't a part of any of the subsequent official Enz reunions, and he's definitely shown some bitterness over that at times. When Counting the Beat was awarded retroactively as the best song of 1981, it was Buster Stiggs that accepted the award, and there's a Split Enz documentary online called Give It a Whirl, featuring plenty of words about Judd and his time with the Enz, the Reptiles, and the Swingers, but no words from Judd himself. He may not have wanted a part of this stuff anyway based on his aversion to live performances and interviews, but I have a feeling that they probably never approached him in the first place, because some of his behaviour would get a bit more sinister than just being antisocial, and this especially came out with the rise of the internet. In 2001, he started posting in an online forum for Split Enz fans, much to the excitement of its users. However, this excitement soon turned to dread, with Judd's repeated antagonising and other unsavoury comments leading to the site's owner imploring him to never return to the site. and receiving some unsavory remarks on her business site for her troubles. In 2010, he served 2 weeks in prison for breaching a restraining order after sending a drunken email to his ex-wife. This came a year after a 12-month suspended sentence for stalking 3 schoolgirls. What's more, in a very upfront interview soon after all this unfolded, not only does he blame the schoolgirl thing on alcoholism and the bipolar disorder that he was eventually diagnosed with in 1992, and asserting that he's not a paedophile, but he's 100% unapologetic about the whole thing. Okay, Phil, so if we take your word for it that you're not a pedo, then do you really see nothing questionable about pretending to be a 17-year-old boy on Facebook and messaging one of these girls to tell her that she's attractive? Or are you trying to say that your substance abuse and mental illness absolves you of any blame? It's just gross all around. I guess this is where the topic of separating the art from the artist comes up again. Can you listen to an artist after learning that they did stuff like this? I'm sure that plenty of people can't, but considering that the lyrical content of the Swingers doesn't ever really come off as creepy, the lyrics are just vapid in general really, then this music doesn't feel intrinsically linked with Judd being a pervert or an asshole to me, so I feel like I can still appreciate the music on its merits. If Judd was writing songs like this, I love little girls, they make me feel so good, now that might have been a different story. If it's any consolation, he hasn't been involved in any reported controversies since then. Maybe the prison time and that rock-bottom interview served as a wake-up call. Maybe he finally started dealing with his issues in a healthy way. I sure hope so, at least. If this interview from last year is anything to go by, then he seems to have mellowed out again, and he's even grateful for the place that his musical career is currently in, even after the turbulent times he'd gone through.
Yeah, well, to me, it's given me all the freedom I'd hoped for, really. You know, you've got the downside of being not pertinent or relevant anymore that we all have when you get to a certain part of your life or career, but I don't give a crap about that. I do it because I love it, and nobody's going to stop me. It just happens, so I feel lucky to be able to do it.
So in the end, it's probably best for everyone involved, including Phil Judd himself, that he didn't reach the same heights as the Finn brothers. It's just a shame that this came at the expense of the Swingers burning out so quickly. But in their brief lifespan, that trio of Kiwi lads created some forward-thinking, memorable rock that deserves far more retrospective love. So yeah, the Swingers, get it into you.